Chapter 13, Charity. I wanted to make a joke here, but I know Bird is actually trying to say bad things about being charitable, so I won't. Chapter 13 is another chapter that goes into Jason's family in Ohio, where we follow his wife Sarah and his kids. Honestly, this is the only cutaway chapter that really means anything in terms of adding tension. The long and short of it is that while Sarah is cooking some food for her kids, a neighbor notices and is clearly sketchy. The next day, she comes out to find that her dog has been poisoned and their small rabbit farm has been stolen in the middle of the night. The chapter ends with Sarah realizing that her sketchy neighbor probably stole from them and might come back to steal more food. Honestly, and this is by and far the best chapter in the entire book, and I do mean that honestly. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot about this chapter to hate. We get another unprompted political rant from the narrator. We get dialogue that makes it sound like Bird has never met another human being, and let alone had an actual conversation with him. More showings that Bird really has no idea how to write kids. But this is the best chapter in the book. Trust me, that's more of an insult than a compliment. We get scenes that increase the tension, with legitimate reasoning for why the antagonists in the scenario do what they do. The sketchy neighbor is clearly starving and desperate, and it's been at least a week since society has collapsed, so there is some genuine reasoning to why he's doing it, other than to just be a bully. Sarah also acts like a person, not a cold-blooded sociopath, and actually gives him some food when he asks, not wanting him to starve, but gets more and more anxious as he keeps doing weird and sketchy things, acting reasonable to her unconfirmed suspicions rather than the showings that we get from her husband, who probably would have shot this guy dead by now, and of Molly, who sends her young child to go get shot. And we leave off without the situation being resolved, or something added to the situation that you automatically know, okay, nothing's going to happen. Giving actual attention to Jason's journey home. It turns out to be somewhat pointless later, but this is small favors. Chapter 13. Best chapter in the whole book. Chapter 14. Faith and Friendship. We cut back to the New York crew as they arrive on the airstrip and meet a guy who owns the land, a guy named Charlie. They examine the plane, load themselves up, ask to sleep in a nearby barn. That way Charlie can over-congratulate them some more for the extremely bare minimum that they did by bringing Damon's body home, and invite them into his house. Another laugh around the water cooler moment. The heroes getting a feast of food, which would be fun, which would be a great resting moment if I ever got the sense that these guys had been struggling this whole time. Eventually, they noticed that a small group of looters had wandered into the property and appeared to be going through the plane. And this is where we get the revelation that Jim is, a really awful person. I mean, you probably could have guessed that by now by the mocking of a guy's death. But there was some actual precedent which led to that. I say people actually think this way, but this book was written by someone who actually thinks this way. But there was actual, I don't want to say precedent, but I can actually see someone believing that. You see, they surprised these three maybe looters by entering and firing a shot at the floor, ordering them all to the ground. Since their group enters firing their gun immediately, one of the men makes a break for it, to which Jim grabs a shovel and proceeds to beat him mercilessly once he catches him, even after the man is knocked unconscious with the first blow. Okay, fine. I can let that slip. Heat of the moment, adrenaline pumping, this guy was running and you don't know where he was going. But then he goes over to another man, who had already surrendered, gotten on his knees, and was raising his hands, and proceeds to beat him with the shovel as well. Then he goes to the third man, who I will state again, has surrendered already, and is laying on the floor with his palms outstretched to show he means no harm now, and proceeds to beat this man mercilessly as well by repeatedly slamming his face into the ground. Then proceeds to cover them in gasoline and threatens to light them all on fire if they don't make off the property fast enough, following the entire time while shooting at their feet with his gun. We get some lip surface about how Jason and Evan are just shocked to see Jim act like this, but don't worry, they quickly brush it off as Charlie and his wife must mean a lot to Jim. But at this point, I don't care. I hate Jim now because Charlie and Clara weren't in any danger. These guys, at worst, were going to steal Evan and Jason's supplies, not Charlie or Clara's. In addition, these men clearly had no intention to harm anyone, as they don't even fight back when Jim is savagely beating them, and quickly surrendered when confronted. I mean, for all we know, obviously they probably weren't, but for all we know, they were just investigating the area to determine, are people actually here? This trope is what is called disproportionate retribution. Basically, where a character will punish an otherwise minor offense far more harshly than it is deserved. And this falls square into it. There is only a certain level of retribution people tend to allow before it becomes uncomfortable and unnecessary. And it comes off more like the person taking their vengeance is the bad person. A good example of this is a thief stealing a piece of bread who gets slapped with a fine and a couple days in jail. That's considered fine and a reasonable punishment. However, if you were to catch that thief and then proceed to hack off his arm and then slowly feed him his own flesh because he says he was hungry and that's why he stole, you become the bad guy, no matter what your reasonings are. And that's what Jim does in this scenario. He does something far over the reasonable measure that I've lost any form of endearment for him, even though I didn't have much in the first place. Anyways, after that, they go back to sleep for the night. We get another clunky dialogue where Bird continues to tell, not show. Apparently, Charlie gives a prayer so profound that it brings tears to all their eyes, and feel a super special connection between them when it's all over. But the first half of the prayer is just mocking people who are suffering due to the collapse of society, while the second half is just generic prayers asking for the New York City crew to be safe on their travels. It's really not that special. Honestly, this would have been one of the few times I'd advocate for Bird just to tell us the prayer was profound rather than writing it out, because at least then I can imagine something that was actually profound. After that, the New York crew take off, leaving a not too subtle hint that this group here will join them. Yes, unfortunately this book has sequels. Chapter 15, By the Air. This chapter is mostly boring. They travel to Ohio on a plane, land on a friend of Jason's airstrip, and then get another expo dump about how the world is really working now. Apart from a couple unprompted political rants, this chapter is a boring slog. About now, you're noticing that my tabs are starting to dry up a little, so you can actually probably count these. But I want to show you something. You see these lime green tabs? This is what I was using for cringe, what the moments, stuff like that. I think it was this one. About this one. This isn't the last cringe moment in the book. I ran out of tabs. Take that for what you will. Hopefully as a warning. Chapter 16. The Reunion. The next chapter starts with them leaving the Friends area. They quickly speed to Jason's house, where there's a brief moment of tension where we don't know if Sarah and the kids are fine as Jason enters to find a dead guy. Again, like I said, the previous chapter was good for setting this up. However, the tension lasts all of about 5 seconds because before it's revealed that they've been alive. And we learn that the sketchy neighbor from earlier in chapter 13 broke into the house the night before and attacked Sarah. So continuing the trend where it's better for a young boy to use guns than his adult mother, one of Jason's sons killed the man by shooting him dead. And while we don't get the exact age of his sons like we did with Evans, it's, like I said, it still sort of falls into that sexism I mentioned. Jason, being the rational person he is, drags the neighbor's corpse outside and crucifies it on the lawn before the group gets together, showers in poisoned water, rests, and they finally decide the situation has become dangerous enough that Peggy and the women should start holding guns. But only after they give them a few hours of range training in the backyard. We get some more awful dialogue from Bird as the team discusses their plan the following day. And with that, they're off to get to the home front and Evan's family. And also Peggy's family, but being a side character, she's not that important. We haven't even heard her mention her kid for like 3 chapters. Now, chapter 17. By the Land. By this point, you might notice that I'm breezing through chapters faster than normal. And even by looking at the book, you notice that I have nowhere near the amount of tabs as earlier, even putting aside the lime green ones running out. You might think that, oh, that means this section of the book has to be the best it has to offer. Well, kinda. I mean, at this point I was so numb to the choppy writing, awful prose, clunky dialogue, and everything else that I was mostly just reading through these final parts with the purpose of being done. Anyways, they get moving, go to get Peggy's kids while Jason and his family drive around the city in order to stay safe. Since Bird wants to keep giving the illusion that our heroes are in danger without giving them actual danger, on the way the heroes stumble into an ambush and have to fight back. We get more examples about how Bird feels the need to fill his paragraph pointlessly, as we get a paragraph-long description of the sun's positioning according to what Jason has put, how that won't reflect off his scope of his rifle, but it will reflect off the scope of their rifles, before ending it with just saying he already has a flash killer on the scope. So, again, pointless. But at least when they kill these ambushes, there's no reason to give this justification I've been demanding lately. Because it's been over a week, there's actual reasonings to think that people are doing things like this without needing it to be described. We can just guess that they're desperate for food or supplies, or they're letting the anarchy of the world guide them now. The chapter ends with Jason and Evan breaking into two teams, where Evan takes Peggy into Kentucky to get her kid, while Jason waits for him at a predetermined spot. Chapter 18. Not so quiet on the home front. We get a quick glance back at Molly and the home front as Bird attempts to increase the tension by showing a group of people that are clearly plotting an assault on the place. But unlike before, since this planning began on the literal day things went bad, I'm not willing to forgive the lack of explanation given to the soon becoming assault on this place. This is pretty much all you need to know here. This chapter is pointless, because we already know that this was happening. Chapter 19. Newport. This chapter starts following the Jones family as they go to the rendezvous point. We get some lip service about Jason worrying about his son killing a man, but oh, don't worry. Sarah assures Jason that Michael, his son, is strong like his dad, so it won't affect him that much. I mean, a sociopath. Eventually, Evan and Peggy come back with her son Zach, where it turns out Peggy's parents were murdered. Probably around the time they decided to take a 2-day break from trying to get back to their families to attend a funeral of some guy they knew about for 3 days. I'm actually not joking. It's revealed that they were literally 2 days too late to save her parents. Uses rape purely for the shock value, because of course that's what happened to her mother as well. Evan also hypocritically talks about how the neighbors did nothing to help these poor people, and the chapter ends with them deciding to hurry back to the home front. Chapter 20. War on the home front. Mercifully, the final chapter. This is basically one long extended action scene where the assault on the home front starts from Molly and the family's perspective, and then ends with Jason and Evan arriving, showing their perspective as they enter. There's really not much to say about this chapter, and honestly, I just kind of sped through it to end the damn book. So I will say this though. At this point, we know why Evan had a .50 caliber rifle. It was so Bird could lick his lips with eager anticipation, as he wrote gory death scenes for every person who was hit by the .50 cal, which he has admittedly done for all the deaths so far, yet this is where it's definitely the most noticeable. None of the heroes get hurt beyond a slight graze in this fight, and the one person that was hit was a kid fighting. Well, he wasn't fighting. Was Vandergrift's kid, who was acting as Vandergrift's spotter, because of course the heroes can't be hurt any more than that. And the chapter ends with them all coming together, and perhaps the most horrifying sentence this book has offered yet.
The new Homefront series will be continued in The Guardians, The New Homefront, Volume 2.
Epilogue. Yeah, this book is awful. This might legitimately be one of the worst books I've ever read. And that's saying something considering the amount of books I've read. The characters were flat and boring. Mary Sue's at their worst, as they rarely struggled. Were always presented in the right, and overthanked for doing even the most minor of helpful things to people. The story is boring, with sentences short and choppy, while the dialogue is stilted and unnatural, almost making me wonder if the authors ever met another human being, let alone had a conversation with one. Don't get me started on the political stuff. That's everywhere in this book. Writing a book that contains political Political themes and politics that you agree with is fine, but this book was written with the politics in mind first and the story second. The story exists solely so characters and even the narrator can just sit there and soapbox about how awful the current reign of government is. It's 2014, remember. Obama was president. And how things are just going so bad with him in charge. And how every person who doesn't believe the exact thing as the characters is pretty much either bullies waiting for an excuse to go out and rape, plunder, and kill, or weak people who will break at the first sign of stress. Not to mention the book is so casually racist and sexist. I've already gone into the racism and the sexism at points. But this book, every woman in this book is a housewife first. They're always the one cooking, cleaning, and otherwise taking care of the men while they sit in the other room drinking and smoking, discussing how to plan their next moves without any input from the women. In the author's world, again, it is somehow better for a young child, as long as he's a boy, to pick up a gun and use it, as opposed to his adult mother as shown a ton of times. A woman fires a gun twice in this book, and only once is it ineffective because she ambushed him while he was stuffing in one of the men's ideas of a trap. It's just awful. Not to mention the sheer amount of awful things that this bird uses to shock you. I'm not going to go back into them, but infanticide and rape are not just things you casually toss out into the book so our white heroes can angrily clench their fists and rue the horrors of the world and shed a single tear about how tragic it is. How tragic it all is. It's just, if you're not going to treat the subject with the respect for the horrible actions being committed in these scenes, don't use them. Rule of thumb, bud. Honestly, this book is a 2 out of 10. I cannot recommend this book, even as a hate read, as it's not enjoyable enough to read through after you reach that one section, at least for me. This 100% goes into Mount Doom without a second thought, and I hope to never have to read this pile of garbage again.
It's gone. It's done.
Honestly, I might need to take a break after this one, folks. But if I do review a book next week, you know what? No. I refuse. I refuse to give in. This book will not defeat me. I don't need a break. I'm going to review my next review. Until next time, remember, with every book comes an adventure. And maybe sometimes you might just let that adventure pass you for your own sanity.